Ujai, everyone. My name is Meritah Hasati, and on behalf of the Earth Center here in Chicago, we extend a very warm greeting to all of you. It's good to see so many faces. It's good to see many new faces as well, too. So we welcome all of you on this day. You could have been doing something else with your time and you came here to learn more about the Earth Center and more about the lecture that's going to be presented here today. We also extend a warm greeting to all of our Earth Center locations who are screening live where you are. We say Ujai to all of you there, and also to all of our viewers who are channeling in all over the world. So we greet all of you. So before we begin, I would like to ask for everyone to turn off their cell phones out of respect for our online viewers to make sure that they can hear this lecture as you're going to receive it here today. Also, as you notice, the camera is here right in front. So if you need to pass through, please utilize the aisles in order to get to where you need to go. Without any further ado, because we also thank you for your patience. I know that some of you have been waiting some time for us to get started. So without any further ado, I would like to give a warm welcome to the head mayor of the school here in Chicago, Marhu Hasati.
Ujai, everyone. How you guys doing today? Right on. Well, once again, we appreciate your patience and waiting. But now officially we are starting. Once again, I introduce myself. My name is Marhu Hasati. I'm an initiate and a teacher here at the Chicago Earth Center. As my sister stated, I'd like to welcome everyone here today and all those initiates viewing across the globe, as well as all those followers of the Earth Center or those that are new to the Earth Center. I greet you all, and we express, on behalf of the Earth Center, we express gratitude for you all being here today and showing your support for what we're doing. The lecture topic that we're going to be covering is the real history of slavery. The reason why we chose this topic is because really it has such a vital importance, not only for people of color, but really all of humanity. And the reason why is because despite the fact if we know it or not, this episode in our human history, this episode of slavery, has impacted the world so greatly. And really it impacts the world that we look outside these doors and see today. But really in our modern educations, it is not really focused on in a way that really we're going to present it this day today. Before we get into the lecture, before I introduce the presenter, I want to give you guys, spend a brief moment, give you guys some brief background behind the Earth Center and its founder. The Earth Center was founded by Prophet Naba Lamusa Morodinabig. Prophet Naba was an authentic Dogon priest as well as a master healer. He grew up in West Africa in a country called Burkina Faso. Master Naba or Prophet Naba is coming from a very prominent ethnic group or a prominent tribe as well as a very prominent bloodline or family in the heart of West Africa. And really this ethnic group and this family, really their origins can be traced to the Nile Valley civilization. So at the age of 8, the Prophet Neb Naba entered into his initiation process deep in the African bush. He excelled within this initiation process to the point where even he himself surpassed his masters. As he continued to build momentum as an initiate and as a priest, he began to travel throughout the continent and even travel throughout the world because of his recognition for his skill in his profession of being a priest and dealing with the priestly duties. So he was summoned to different spiritual sites, different temples, because of his understanding of the spiritual domain and the technical aspect of that domain. So eventually, it was Prophet Nebnaba that was appointed and given permission by his elders as well as the royalty of his people to be the one chosen to come out into the world and really reintroduce to the world the initiatic knowledge, the sacred knowledge of the continent that we know as Meritah, but in the modern world we often call Africa. So after all his travels, he eventually found himself here in the United States in 1996, and in 1998 he established the Earth Center. Now the Earth Center is a nonprofit, non-governmental cultural organization, and the Earth Center is dedicated to preserving and promoting traditional African or Kemetic culture, philosophy, healing, spirituality, so on and so forth. The Earth Center is composed of 3 branches. It's a very dynamic organization. These three branches, I will label them, one being Ancestral Natural Healing, which is the healing branch of the Earth Center. Second being Firefly Productions, which is the production house of the Earth Center. Third being the School of Kemetic Philosophy and Spirituality. And along with the work that is going on within these 3 branches of the Earth Center, also the Earth Center is very present in assisting the continent, the traditional societies in Meritah with sustainable development. So we have many projects that we are doing assisting these cultures that have been able to preserve their very old ancestral traditions. Some of our projects consist of establishing or helping to build wells, providing clean water, as well as farming projects so that their traditional knowledge on how to produce food, crops, all that knowledge can be preserved. One of the main projects that we're working on right now is establishing a healing center, or what we can consider like a traditional hospital where traditional healers can come and provide their services not only to people on the continent, but as well people outside the continent that have the money that can fly there and receive these services. Another important project that we do with the Earth Center is we have our annual pilgrimage. Every year, the Earth Center invites all its initiates as well as those following the Earth Center, supporting the Earth Center, to come back and travel to the continent, to the motherland, to experience the side of Meritah, the side that really we aren't exposed to in the modern world. The side that we see is often we refer to Africa, but the side that is rooted in the traditions that go back to the original civilization, we call that Meritah, and that's the side that we are able to experience. And we don't go there as tourists, but we go there really because of our connection to Prophet Nebnaba. We go as like extended members of his family. So a lot of the secrecy that's been able to preserve the culture for so long, we are exposed to aspects of that. So certain traditions, rituals, spiritual sites, things of that nature we have access to, as well as just the daily lifestyle. We're able to enter into that and integrate into the communities there, which is a very profound experience. So with the Earth Center being established here in Chicago in 1998, since that time, we've grown, and now we have a total of 8 centers. We have 5 located here in the United States. We have 1 located back home on the continent of Meritah in the country of Burkina Faso in the city of Ouagadougou. And we recently opened 2 schools in Europe, in the UK. I suggest that you all check out our website if you want to learn more information about the Earth Center. This is just a kind of a brief summary of our organization and our founder. So now I want to introduce the individual that's going to be presenting the lecture to you all today. His name is Hezmana. He joined the Earth Center in 2004 and began his initiation. He is a part of the last generation that had the privilege and honor of being directly initiated by Prophet Nebnaba before he transitioned back to Meritah to continue on with his work there. And when Master Naba or Prophet Naba transitioned back to Meritah, it was Nehez that ran and kind of held down the headquarters here in Chicago while he was away. And in 2013, Nehez was appointed the director of all the Earth Center schools worldwide. So it's a big privilege and honor to have him here today. So without further ado, help us welcome Hezmana.
Thank you, sir. Ujjayi, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's lecture. And I'd like to start, as we always start here at the Earth Center, by acknowledging the ancestors, acknowledging my ancestors that allowed me to be here today, acknowledging your ancestors that allowed you to come, that brought you to the Earth Center, because this is a spiritual center. And spirituality begins with the ancestors. We know that any quality that we have, any privilege that we have, any strength, we got that from our ancestors. It was our ancestors that passed that down to us. And we have the responsibility now to keep it and try to maintain the quality before we pass it down to our children. So I want to start by honoring those ancestors and honoring specifically the Prophet Nebnabala Musa Murodinabig, whose picture is here, the founder of the Earth Center, the one who brought us the opportunity to reconnect to our traditional culture, our ancestral culture, and the knowledge that it has kept. So I want to start by acknowledging him. To my technicians, I'm going to remove this mic, okay? Okay. I want to make something clear before we really get into today's lecture. For those of you who have been to the Earth Center, who have been to our lecture series that we do here at the Earth Center, you know that we get into our lecture topics very slowly. Those of you that are new, whether you're here in Chicago or whether you're here in one of the centers around the world, or if you're viewing online, please be aware of that. We're going to move into our topic slowly, but surely. Well, we do this because we feel like our situation today as human beings in this world is too serious to rush. We're living in a time that's very, very, our situation is grave. We can look around us, we can see what's going on. We can see what's going on with the weight of the politics that seems to just be mercilessly using our lives for whatever the new ambitions of our leaders are. And in a situation like this that leaves us kind of lost in the confusion that they would have us in, to be as malleable as possible, when we're trying to gain some footing and we're trying to bring our minds together to improve our situation, we don't want to rush. We don't want to rush. So just bear with me. The Earth Center's monthly lecture series gives us an opportunity in the midst of all of the projects that we're doing here at the Earth Center that my brother Marhu just explained a little bit about. It gives us the opportunity to hold lectures and bring together our community to put our attentions on some of the very fundamental concepts that are important to us as a culture, that were important to our ancestors and will be important for us as we moving forward to tomorrow. And today's topic, I want to clarify, because it was presented as the real history of slavery. But at the Earth Center, as the prophet said while he was here, we don't have the pretension that we own the truth. We don't have the pretension that we're the ones to be able to tell you the real history, because we face the fact that, well, we're just human beings. We're just human beings, and we know, because our ancestors have told us, that this existence that we find ourselves in, it doesn't expose itself to us. There's no place we can go and the truth just opens up to us and we can learn anything we want to learn. It doesn't work that way. But what it does is it answers the questions that we pose. So when we have a question and we bring it to the existence, we can find the answer. But that makes what we know, what we think we know, based on the questions that we bring. And we know that the questions that we bring will be dependent on the culture that we're in. They're just a product of the culture that we're in. They're just a product of the exposure that we've had. To put it in simple terms, as the Meritah always used to say, or excuse me, Prophet Nebnaba used to say, a human being is just what they're exposed to. That exposure will then provide the questions that we bring to the existence. And the answers that we get back from those questions now defines what we think we know. This is the reality of a human being. That means anything that a human being thinks he or she knows is going to be only at best partially true. Because we're small. 2 eyes, 2 ears. We only see so far. We only hear so far. We are limited by this principle of perspective, of exposure. So we know that anything that we have is only partially true. And therefore, by definition, it's partially false. But at the Earth Center, what we are proud of is the fact that the questions that we're holding and the answers that we are receiving are the ones coming from our ancestors. So the perspective that we're standing with represents our ancestors, where we've been, where our ancestors have been, what we've been through, where we've struggled, where we've thrived, where we can see that we begin to separate ourselves, where we can see we begin to unify. We get that from our ancestors, and we're very proud of that. We're proud because when you entered the Earth Center, you didn't come to hear the perspective that's out there around you. That's out there around you, that's taught in the colonial universities, that's taught in the colonial systems, that is a part of the same political machine that seems to be dominating the world. So, to put it a little better, or a little bit more clearly, today I'll be talking about a Kemetic history of slavery. A Kemetic history of slavery. And so, of course, to start, I will have to give a very clear picture of what Kemet is, because that has not been immune to the confusion of the modern education. Today, there are many misrepresentations of Kemet. One of the most common and perhaps the most impactful is that today people understand Kemet to be the Nile Valley. And I've heard many questions or complaints or dilemmas posed by seekers, wondering why so many people put their attention on Kemet when the continent of Africa is such a big place? How can you be talking about you living for your ancestors, you want to respect your ancestors, get back to your culture, and then you choose this one small portion of a huge continent, and then you're only talking about that? But please understand that's coming from a grave misunderstanding that I want to clear up. Kemet is not the Nile Valley. Kemet, if we have to associate it with the physical territory, can be considered the entire continent of what is now called Africa. However, even more appropriately, it is associated with a culture. And that culture goes beyond even that continent of Africa, but it reaches into the Middle East, it reaches into Asia, reaches to the continent of Australia, it reaches to the continent of the Americas. And one can do their research and look into this and see that the Kemetic language, what is called hieroglyphs by within academia, what we call the Medu, you can see that anthropologists are digging up new relics with this language all over the world. They're finding new pyramids under the sea all over the planet. And so one should understand that this culture is a culture that has went around the globe. And it's a very methodical attack to try to limit it to one river valley. But please don't continue with that misunderstanding, and understand when we say a Kemetic history of slavery, we're talking about a slavery that comes from our elders and our ancestors that have preserved the knowledge of Kemet, the entire continent. Now, another misunderstanding about Kemet, another thing that comes to limit the scope of Kemet and its influence on humanity is time. Just as Kemet seems to be misrepresented in space, it's also misrepresented in time. And so we see, because of some of the stories that the modern religion has presented, we've seen as science tries to dance within the boundaries of those stories and say, well, humanity is only 6,000 years old because this religion said it was only 6,000 years old. And then Kemet got limited to how far it actually reached back into history. And so because of that, Kemet, more than 6,000 years, is now seen as a different civilization than Kemet today. And the Kemetic influence on history, reaching back 50,000 years, 100,000 years, is now fragmented, and it's split up into different civilizations. So now there's this argument, well, was what is mistakenly referred to as ancient Egypt, was that the first civilization, or was it Syria, or was it some other one that they're trying to dissect the different influences of Kemet from one another? But understand this is another misrepresentation, because I can't call a son a different culture than the father, right? I can't call the student a different culture than the teacher. So this is another big misrepresentation or miseducation done to Kemet. Understand that Kemet, throughout history and even today, really is seen as the light of the world. And what do I mean by that? It's seen as a place of abundance, a place of wealth, and most importantly, as a place of knowledge that any honest seeker in the world that's trying to learn more, evolve as a human being, it's where they go to study. Now, before the age of politics, this was very, very apparent. Everybody knew that if you're interested in studying, you're interested in studying higher levels of civilization, you travel to the capital of Kemet, which was the Nile Valley. Many writers, even in the modern world, have written about that. Sheikh Anta Diop, George James, many people have written about this. It was Massey, even I think was one that called it the light of the world. Many people in all different cultures have written about this because, again, Kemet is so integral to our history as humans on this planet. So that's why you can see it studied in every colonial university around the planet. So it was the light of the world, and all people would travel there. And I say that it still is the light of the world, whether you know it or not, whether you're listening to what your politicians are telling you or not. Kemet is a place of great wealth. I know here in the West, that might be surprising to understand because we told so many things by the propaganda machine about the way Africa looks. But let me just explain something. Any place that domesticated animals, that domesticated plants, that you can take a walk, take a 15, 20-minute walk, and you can harvest your entire dinner on just that walk. That place is not a place of hunger, right? That place is not a place of desperation. I just said I can go for a walk and come back with my whole dinner. I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to go to a store. I didn't have to hunt. That's how rich that place is. And I know we're watching many commercials about how poor and how pathetic it is, but we just said we all kind of now in this situation where the world that we see is based on who can yell about it the loudest. But if we're serious about our destiny and the destiny of our species, we're going to have to pull ourselves and our ears out of the cacophony of the arguments by whatever new leader wants to lead us, wherever they have to lead us, and we have to start thinking about where really are we coming from? And where are our elders and our ancestors telling us about where we've been? So Kemet is a place of wealth. It's a place of knowledge. And it's a place of knowledge that the whole world has been bringing its attention to because our Kemetic ancestors made perhaps the most profound discovery in human history. You can read about Kemet bringing the world mathematics. You can read about Kemet bringing the world astronomy, bringing the world masonry, all of the different schools that humanity is still today. But none of them compare to the most important discovery that Kemet made. And that discovery is the world of the gods. The world of the gods. And because those our Kemetic ancestors discovered the world of the gods, they then have the highest level of technical understanding of that world that we find on the planet. And so the temples in Kemet have long been understood to be the place to go when you want to learn and progress in spirituality. This is very, very important. So, like I told you, we're going to get to the topic, but we're going to have to go through. Today's topic really obliges me to go into a lot of history because we're going to have to look into the history of the way we identify ourselves now today as human beings. Because today we identify ourselves, the identifications that we have, that we claim, seem to be leading us into so many problems. So much so that even to talk about the history of those identities can almost be taboo. People don't like to hear you now start to question however you identify yourself or however they identify themselves. This is taboo. But as I said at the beginning, our situation is too drastic. I'm giving this lecture from Chicago, where the murder rate between our youth is too high for us to worry about what's comfortable or not in conversation. Am I right? I'm giving this lecture today where we've had wars going on in the Great Lakes region of Kemet that have cost so many lives, an appalling number of lives, in the Congo and Rwanda, where even the people here today, I mean, the people on this side of the planet don't even know those wars are still going on. We know all of the misery that we see around ourselves. I don't really need to go further into that. But this obliges us to really take a look at the history of the way we're identifying ourselves and the way we see in ourselves today. So I want to start there. In the temples along the Nile Valley, which we called the Happy Valley, the temples along the Happy Valley were receiving many people from all over the world who wanted to study. Many people from all over the world who wanted to study their ancestral roots, wanted to study the Kemetic traditions, wanted to study the spiritual world. Just as today, the Earth Center is now trying to present that same opportunity to people, the Kemetic temples for the first time has presented this opportunity to unveil the secrecy of the Kemetic initiations and give people that opportunity. We have initiates from all over the planet. So back then, they were receiving people from all over. And there were some people coming from a territory from north of the Mediterranean Sea that when they came, what they were presented to the Kemetic priests, the initiatic priests, was a high level of ignorance. Meaning, these Kemetic priests that were receiving them in the temples saw that they didn't know about basic hygiene. They didn't know about basic social etiquette. Because in that time, when you go to a temple and you ask to be allowed in, you say you want to be initiated. The customary thing to do is that you go in a very humble way. You present yourself, you say, I'm looking for a master. I wish to learn more. And then you even have brought gifts from wherever you're coming from for that. Because it wasn't like the way the world is now. Now the world is like whoever you can throw money at, they have to take your money, whatever you want, they take it, you get it, and that's how it functions. But we're talking about before the world turned on its head. So in that time, you actually had to be respectful to get something from somebody. You had to actually approach them the right way to get what you're after. And these Kemetic priests saw that these individuals were not approaching them in the customary way. They were making demands. You know, they were having high ambitions. And this was all coming while they didn't even know how to wash themselves. So those Kemetic priests, as initiatic teachers will do to this day, they gave nicknames to the people coming from that territory to kind of highlight or put a very to put a mirror on how those people were acting, how those people were presenting themselves. And that's done even to this day. And they refer to these people as Gerka. Gerka. Gerka in the initiatic language will mean the spirits coming from darkness, the spirits coming from obscurity or ignorance. And that's how they referred to them. Now understand, they didn't turn them away, but they said, okay, you can come, you can study, but at the same time, if you're showing this quality, that this is what they had in their mind, if you're showing this lack of quality, we're going to keep you there. We're going to hold you at a certain point until you can raise your quality and then go further. This is the same principles of initiation that exist today. So this is Gerka, the origins of the word Greek or Greece. That territory they were coming from was Greece. And so even when you study now in the colonial world, in the modern education, you look for the origins of the word Greece, and they're kind of shrouded in mystery. You always have to wonder, when history is shrouded in mystery, I mean, we came from there. How can it be that mysterious? It happened. So you know, then that's when people are now trying to influence it because they don't like the way it makes them look. So this situation of the Gerka continued, and some of them studied, some of them came to study, some of them came to loot and try to take what they could. Some of them, they came. It's a whole territory. So as I'm giving history today, I want you to keep in mind the perspective, because I'm talking about a long period in history. I'm not giving specific events. I'm talking about the general sequence of events that happened in history over a long period of time. So some of the people coming from that area were coming just trying to take what they can get, even stealing a lot of wealth and things from the Nile Valley and taking it back across the Mediterranean, while some were coming and trying to learn. About 2,500 years before the current era, started to plan invasions on a group level. Like, we're going to really start to try to penetrate the Kemetic system in the Nile Valley to gain the power that we see Kemetic people having on the planet. And so at a certain point, as they're starting to build their nation, as they're starting to build their identity in the way they wish, they get rid of the name Greek. They get rid of the name Greek because that's just the kind of the derogatory nickname they were given by Kemet. So now they bring the name Rome. Everybody's heard of Rome, right? And now you've heard of some of the start of Rome was around about 700 years before the current era. And you've heard that the origins of Rome, they now tie to, just like some scholars will try to tie the origins of the name Greece to a Greek god. They will also try to tie the name Rome to a Greek god, Romulus, and you've heard of this. But Rome also comes from the Kemetic language, the initiatic language, because understand, what was really the basis of knowledge around the world at that time is what's coming from Kemet. In the Kemetic language, Rome will mean like inside of Ra, the god Ra. So they now said, no, we no longer Greek, now we Roman. And they were continuing to try to kind of etch out their own identity in history. And then around 700 years later, and even back then, when right around the time Rome was established, the name Rome was established, that also was the time that the first written language of Greece was established. And that also was established under the guidance of the priests of the Nile Valley. This is how much kind of influence those priests had on the entire world, because that's where knowledge is coming from. That's where we opened our eyes to the gods. That's where we had a reason to be more than the beasts around us. So at about 75 years before the current era, the Romans did something very, very, very crucial that is having a huge impact on the way we live in today. Within the Kemetic spiritual texts, the color white is associated with the absence of color, and therefore with purity and innocence. And so because of that, the Romans said, okay, from now on we're white. Everybody can see the skin of Romans is not white. Even amongst Europeans, Romans are not even the lightest Europeans. So, but this was the territory that decision was made. From now on, we're white, and the rest of the world is black. And this was very, very crucial, because this now begins a dualism. Us and them. The whites and the blacks. But understand what I'm saying, because it started with Romans and the rest of the world. That means all of the other light-skinned people around the planet were just blacks too. There's the whites and there's the blacks. There's the us that we in Rome protect, that we fighting for, and there's the them that we fight. So this was huge. This was huge. And this is the origin to that identity that all of you now have. Because when we go, even we thinking about ourselves, one of the first things we thinking, hey, I'm a black person. This is the ridiculousness of that origin. Hey, I'm a white person. Hey, I'm red. Hey, I'm yellow. Before 75 BCE, the world didn't know that. The world didn't know races. Sure, we have different levels of pigmentation, but even in the heart of Kemet, we have people that are lighter in pigment than people in Rome. So what are we really talking about? So this was very big in recreating their identity. And that dualism continued to kind of gain steam, and they continued to work on that dualism with every new religious story they presented. Because remember, they were now starting to really look at how they can dominate the world, how they can take control of the world, how they can gain the power that they saw Kemet having. But notice the difference. Kemet had a power given down to them, passed down to them from their ancestors. Their ancestors discovered the world of the gods, and now if you want to learn about spirituality and interacting, you give power to them because you want to come and learn from them. That's the power that Kemet had on the globe. But now, this new territory, these white people now want the power of imposing on other people. So it's not other people coming to them saying, wow, I hope you lead us. I really hope that you will lead us, et cetera, et cetera. It's, okay, you do what I say now by the threat of my barbarism. How far I'll go. How I'll threaten your life. How I'll torture you. It's a totally very different power, right? That's clear for everybody, right? Okay. So this is the situation that's behind our the way that we identify ourselves. And hopefully we really thinking about that, because now, if in much of the other, or let me say, if around the globe, your identity is based on your family, your bloodline, your clan, your tribe, etc., etc. Now, see how the position we've been put under politics, because now our identity is maybe gender and race. And that race, we just talked about how ridiculous that was. How ridiculous that was. People who couldn't even clean themselves. This is the idea that they had to now just make sure they can create a dualism to gain the momentum and the emotion of the people with them to go and fight the people that are not them. Okay. So, today's topic, we are going to focus, as we talk about slavery, we're going to focus on the slave trade of the transatlantic trade. The transatlantic trade of human beings. And we all know that that trade happened in Africa. As I was saying, those Romans began to build that dualism, build the emotions up in people to really kind of demonize what they called black people. And so as you see their religious stories start to grow or be refined, now you see in the Christian Bible, you see there's this son of Israel named Ham. Is that right? And Ham is cursed. And now in the stories, Ham is clearly where people of color are descended from. So now those blacks that are not you are even cursed by God himself. And then even as we continue, now what's added to the Bible is even imagery that the devil himself is black too. So now even they look like the devil, they're cursed by God, they deserve, if you even love God, then you hate them. That's the fragility of the human perspective that we're talking about. Because, hey, if I'm born in a culture where just to prove my love to my God, I have to hate you and destroy your life. What else is there to do? This is how politics has been ruining the human life, condemning the human soul in their spiritual destiny. Okay, so we're going to make another big point here, because in that momentum, the building of that momentum for that dualism of us versus them, of whites versus blacks, now they've said that the blacks are cursed as descendants of Ham. The blacks are the same color as the devil himself. Now they give a territory to where those cursed people are. And then they kind of, in response to being called Gerka, they now say, okay, now if we were Gerka in the past, you now are African. And Africa means, in the initiatic language, Afri, or burning, and Ka, souls or spirits. So Africa being the place of burning souls, which reflects the imagery of their religions. So this is the situation, the history of those identities we now are rallying ourselves behind. Hey, we black, we African. Respect us, we African. And now we're seeing that actually the source of those things was to make sure to disrespect us and to have the world turn against us. Okay, now that we've kind of laid some groundwork or some foundation, if we are going to now start talking about the transatlantic trade, what you will have to understand is that what we know about it, just as I said before, is based on who's shouting at us the loudest. Who's shouting at us the loudest, and who has the power, the political power, and who benefits from the stories we told. And that's affecting every aspect of the history. Today, we usually are aware, especially in the Americas, in the West, in the diaspora, we're usually aware of a few main slave routes. And that is Goree Island. Who's heard of Goree Island? Who's heard of Cape Coast? Elmina. So is there another one that people have heard of? You can just shout it out. Usually the routes that we know of, that we're aware of, are limited. And that's because those are the ones that are now tourist attractions. Those are the ones that now people benefit from financially. But slave routes were all around the continent. We're not really going to get into the Arabic slave trade today, and that was bringing routes to the eastern side of Meritah or Kemet. But even in the transatlantic trade, you had routes into Goree Island or Gambia, Senegal area. You have routes into Ghana, which is where Elmina, Cape Coast, those things are. You have routes into Ivory Coast, routes into Togo, Benin, Nigeria, Namibia, Angola, even down to the south, to the southern portion of. And I want to point out something here, because just to tell you how much kind of we missing if we're allowing our educators to be the sole, if we're allowing the modern education system to be our sole educators. Because the Ghana, where Elmina and Cape Coast are, Ghana is referred to as the Gold Coast. You've heard that, right? Ghana is referred to the Gold Coast. Even Cote d'Ivoire kept that name. They're referred to as the Ivory Coast. And it's not the people there that named them gave them those names. The people didn't say, hey, this is the Ivory Coast, come get your ivory. That's not how it went. It's the colonizers that were coming to take resources out of the continent that gave the names of those coasts. And it's the coast that runs along the south of Togo, Benin, Nigeria. That's called the Slave Coast. Remember, everybody knows about the ones in Ghana, but even they themselves called that one Gold Coast. And even in the Gold Coast, you have a slave castle or a fort where they're trading humans for wealth. You have a fort every 50 miles on that coast. That's how much it was happening there. And that's the Gold Coast. So imagine how much it was happening in the Slave Coast. So the first misrepresentation is the location, the locality, where it was actually going on. So you will have to, if you're serious about being a seeker of knowledge, if you're serious about learning your history, you will have to take that responsibility in your hands. Because you see, if you're just going to take what people are telling you, that is just going to be based on what benefits them. Those forts, those castles that were on the slave coast, most of them are all broken down now. the people there didn't maybe have the idea to be able to make money on them like the people in the Gold Coast are doing. So we have to be very proactive if we want to find the true face of things. So this is the situation. Now, these are the territories that the Earth Center travels to on our annual pilgrimage. And this is the location where much of the royalty, the priesthood, the knowledge, as it left the territories of the Nile Valley and crossed the Sahara Desert to try to protect the intellectual and spiritual resources that they had, this is the region that they went. What I think every year when we take groups of individuals to pilgrimage and we travel through some of those historic sites on the coast, some of those historic sites on the slave coast and having to do with the trafficking of human beings, everybody wants to know how did it happen? How could it happen? You have a culture that's so refined here, so wealthy here, so intelligent here. The traditions are so deep. How could they be so vulnerable to this? So we're going to talk a little bit about how it started. But I want you to first understand the difference in the perspectives that we've already presented. Because Kemet is known for being the descendants of the ancestral culture that opened our eyes to spirituality. That's what's now defining the questions they ask. That's what's now defining the answers they get. That's what's now defining the cultures and the reasons they have for doing what they do. Where the territories of Europe was a very difficult place for human life. Understand, we're talking just about humanity now. Because if my ancestors didn't talk about race, and that was those in Greece trying to rule the planet, I don't need to talk about them. I don't need to talk about them. If humanity being seen as one humanity is good enough for my ancestors, it's good enough for me. I don't need to follow white man wherever he's going, right? Excuse me? So, Europe, when we look back into the history of humanity, Europe was a very difficult place. Europe was a very difficult place, like I said. When they came into Kemet, we saw they didn't have basic hygiene. And that's because when you're looking into Europe's history, I mean, even when you look at Europe today, you see it's very cold temperature, cold climates, right? Now, before you have the things that have come about in the modern world, like running water, electricity, and things like that, in a cold place, you better know medicine. Because cold areas is very easy to get sick there, right? Now, if you don't have any medical knowledge and the place is cold, you don't even have really crops. How many of you know that of all the crops that are eaten today by Europeans, by people in the colonial world, all but one of them come from outside of Europe? There's one food crop that is native to Europe. Does anybody know what that is? Barca. Asparagus. You can see how hardy asparagus looks like. It could grow anywhere. That's the one food crop that's native to Europe. Everything else comes from outside of Europe. So now, think about how this will be for a human life. The only food crops I can find is asparagus. You can eat asparagus for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's cold outside. You don't have medicinal knowledge because medicine back then is plants. But nothing grows there. It's too cold. It's too dark. It stays overcast. Now, that breeds superstitions because now people there begin to see when somebody gets wet and then they go out in the cold, what happens when we get wet and we go out in the cold? You get sick, you start freezing. And then if you don't have medicine, that sickness leads to death. So now water is associated with like bad spirits, and you don't even want water to touch you. So the hygiene, you can't find it there because even to bathe yourself, you're just kind of giving yourself to those bad spirits. So this is not, please understand, this is just history now. We're just going into history now. This is not about xenophobia. I just said I don't deal with races. I don't deal with xenophobia. This is a spiritual center. And if we want to find out where we stand in today to try to improve where we're going, we're going to have to take an honest look at where we're coming from. That's the only thing that we're doing right now. So this is the situation there. It was a place of desperation, a place of hunger, a place of sickness. You see before 1700s, epidemic after epidemic, Black Plague, things taking many, many lives because there was the absence of these things. You know, without hygiene, you can't protect yourself from disease. Without medicine, you can't protect yourself from disease. So this was the situation there. Then in the culture, you have this dualism being set up even between neighbor and neighbor. Because remember, I said black versus white didn't start out the same way you have it in your mind today. So from neighbor to neighbor, it was about how can I conquer you and then subdue you. Even if you study the history of Greece, the history of Rome, you see it's just war after war after war after war after war. So now you can see the questions they pose in the existence. How can I gain power? How can I impose myself on others around the planet? Totally different questions than the ones coming from Kemet. A total different perspective than the one coming from Kemet. So right around the turn of the century, this is maybe 1,000 years after they've made that differentiation of the whites versus the blacks. This is hundreds of years after they've presented the Bible and all of those stories come to get behind that dualism and demonizing what they're now calling Africa. Right around the turn of the century, Europe now reaches the western portion of Meritah for the first time. The western portion of Kemet for the first time. And when they do, they're received by the people there. How many of you have been to Africa or Meritah? All of you who've been there know the first thing you see is hospitality, right? Hopefully, if you got to go into real Meritah, you see hospitality. Maybe you stayed in the hotels and things like that, maybe you don't know. But if you touch the real culture there, it's about hospitality. Even in Kemet, we say you don't even have to have money to travel. Because as long as you get, all you have to worry about is getting to where you're going. Because as long as you get there, then the hospitality takes care of you. You're going to be fed, you're going to be put in a place to sleep, all of that you don't have to worry about. So when those first Europeans came to the western portion of Meritah, they were received by the people there, they were received by the kings. And they were received by the royalty. And that, when they were received by the royalty, for Kemet, it started as a opportunity for friendship amongst kings. The kings coming from there, we receive you, and then maybe there can be a trade of goods. But what did Europe have to trade? Yeah, I mean, who's going to trade for asparagus? I mean, maybe even today we like it because it's the culture that we under, but asparagus, come on. So what did they really have to trade? So there's already a problem. But remember, the mind, the perspective you come in with defines your life, defines the way you see the world. And Europe had a way they did that. The people coming from Europe had a very aggressive way they see the world. And so they first, the principle really, let me back up a little bit and start to make things kind of clear, because the principle that really triggered the trade of human beings was the principle of, if I can get you to think that your brother or your neighbor is trying to kill you, and then get you to think that I have your best interest in mind, what will you do? If I can sell to you that your neighbor has it out for you for this reason, but I want to try to protect you, I'm on your side, what will you do? We're going to come back to that. So they came with that kind of, because remember, they've been for now, remember we said if Greece started, a couple thousand years ago, they've been working at dominating each other for a long time, expanding the identity of the white person for a long time. Because when the white person first came about, people in Kemet, like, they're white, they're not white. That doesn't even make sense. It's just kind of ridiculous. And then even they took another thing from Kemet too. They even showed how ridiculous this new identity was. They said, okay, because in the Kemetic spiritual text, the West is blessed by the gods. The territory of the West is blessed by the gods. And the territory of the West, or even what we call the afterlife, or even what you can kind of associate with what you might see as heaven, is the name we give it is the West, the land in the West, the Emancipation. So because West had that association, they said, okay, we're the whites, the pure ones, coming from the blessed land, the West. But for the people in Kemet, we're like, that's kind of silly, because Europe is in the north. They didn't even reach Americas yet. Europe is in the north. You're not white. But there's the identity they gave themselves. With that identity, they started to expand that identity. When they expand that identity, it's about domination, it's about subduing, it's about slavery, and they're working with that for thousands of years before even reaching Africa. Today, now, we say slave and we think of maybe black people in chains, right? Let's be as honest as possible. Remember, we came here to have an honest conversation so that we can get to someplace better than where we've been yesterday. We think of the word slave, that's what we think of, because that's what the history books are telling us. That's what the new education system is telling us. But I'm explaining now, this tradition of dominating others, enslaving others, subduing others, that comes from these territories. And that was done for thousands of years, even before it reached the continent of Kemet. So even when you look into your history, and remember, by the end of this lecture, everybody's going to be very proactive in looking into this history, because you can't just take my word for it. You look into the history, you see the first word for slaves is just the names of people in that area. Welsh. Even slave itself comes from the Slavic tribes there. And it just moves around, because whoever they're trying to demonize at that time, that's who they're calling slave. That's how serious it is, because even your name, I'm a Welsh person, that meant slave. Just like now, you think of slave, it just means black. That's just what it means. So now, that's what was behind them. When they got to the continent, one of the first things they tried when these people were receiving them, well, they try to capitalize or manipulate or utilize the situation of land issues. Because before the modern world, and we have, you know, the new system come and create all of the territories and boundaries and say this one belongs to France, this one belongs to Europe, and all of that. We don't have any borders that are, you know, protected by arms and the army and all of that, and you can't cross unless I see your visa. This was before all of that happened. So now, if my clan owns this territory, there's no clear line between where your clan owns or where your clan is. So there's always some small arguments and things going on between people about where their territory stops and the new territory starts, or your territory starts. And so Europeans came and they kind of went for that. They said, if you can get rid of those people that are on the edge of your land and take more land, won't you benefit from having more land? So why don't you just go and kill those people? But remember, Kemet has a different mind, so that didn't work. Go and kill people for land? Go and kill people for nothing? Why would we do that? Understand the difference in culture, because even in Kemet, we have all the knowledge of plants. We have the knowledge of poisons. We even know poisons you can put on the tip of your arrow to go hunting. You never put that on the tip of your arrow for another person. It's just a difference. You just don't go kill. It's only the new system that has brought the idea that through barbarism, I can show you I'm civilized. Before, that didn't connect. I can't be the most civilized because I can kill better than everybody else, because my weapons are bigger than everybody else. That's barbarism. That's animal. So that didn't exist back then. So when you bring in kings, you're telling them, hey, you're having this issue with the guy to the west of you. Why don't you just kill some of them and they'll give on that land and then you'll get that land? King will be like, no, that's barbarism. So that didn't really work. That didn't really work. I mean, you have wars, don't get me wrong, you have wars in Kemet, but the wars are about principle, and the wars aren't about killing. Even if you happen to kill people in war, Kemet is based on spirituality. The basic spiritual rule is don't do to others what you don't want done to you, right? The basic moral rule, everybody knows, even made its way into the culture we now, non-culture we now are part of. That's the basic. So even if you happen to kill somebody in a war in Kemet, you have to go and then go to their king afterwards and pay that king. You have to be the one to bury them, to take care of all of that, because you know spiritually they have more power now in the land of the dead than they did here. So you don't want to disrespect them and just leave them like that. So it's a totally different culture. Totally different culture there. So that didn't work. So then they tried to go on what the Kemetic kings were looking at it like. A friendship between kings and a trade between, a trade in exchange of goods. But like I said, what did they really have to give? They didn't have anything to give. So that's another dilemma on their hands. You have these people just that live differently, see the world differently. They won't kill. They won't just do that. And then now they have a lot of wealth to give, but we don't have anything to give for it. No, they didn't have any weaponry. I'm going to take questions after, though. But they didn't have any weaponry at that time. What they benefited from is the fact that Kemet is deep in spiritual culture. And for any spiritual person, especially for a king that has responsibility over people, if you're in a place of desperation, a place seeking your survival, I'm always going to be there to help. Even when you look at the 77 commandments, the third commandment says, thou shalt not deprive a poor person of their subsistence. We all human beings. If I see you suffering and I could do something about it, I can't just sit and not do anything. So these people gave these kings an opportunity to help. So even it started with like a donation. And the tribes of Europe got a lot from this. So now the kings in Kemet are giving them ivory, silver, but even things like soap. Soap, that's the first time now Europe comes into contact with soap, because remember I said asparagus. Not even a plant that produces oil necessary for making soap grows in Europe. That's how desperate a place it was. So now coming to a land of abundance, now they found soap. Now they get glass. Even glass comes from those trades, from the Kemetic royalty. The things. We come back to it. So now they start to get that. One other thing that came from those early trades or even donations is maps, world maps. And with these new world maps, now European royalty and political authority now found out about places across the sea. Because up until that time, Europe was very afraid of the sea, afraid of water travel. You can even look into their literary history and see, you know, stories of Loch Ness monsters and all of these monsters under the sea. They didn't go into the sea. But when they got that knowledge from the Kemetic kings, now they begin to have the maps that then led them to the Americas. But remember, when I started, I said this interaction begins around 1000 AD, 1,000 years into the new era. They didn't reach the West until when? You guys are following me, right? You guys went through their history. You guys remember when they reached the West? 1400s, right? Almost 1500s. So that was 400, 500 years. Remember, I said you have to keep this in context because I'm going to be going through a lot of things, but this happened over hundreds of years. So they got soap, they got maps. Those maps led to them getting to the West. Even when they first went to the West, I mean, they see the West. The West is another place. I mean, if you kind of try to look past all of the concrete and everything that's here now, the skyscrapers, the West is a wealthy place. Things grow here. The land is very, very wealthy. So when they got here, they called it El Dorado, the land of wealth, the land of gold. So when they got here, now they actually have something to bring back, because now there's real crops here. There's real resources here. There's stones and all of that here. Gold and all of that is here. So now they have something to bring back to those kings, and now that kind of adds to their strength in those trades. Traveled west. They got the maps from Kemet. They even got some navigational guidance from Kemet. Even to first few travels to the west, they're bringing Kem people with them to help. They come back to the kings in Kemet. They say, okay, we reached the west. Wow, out there, there's so much potential, all of this, all of that. But we need your help in teaching us how to farm and teaching us how to, you know, benefit from the potential that's there. And even for the first period of that interaction, what you don't know, what you're not told, is that Kemetic people will go and the Europeans will even bring them back to build a trust. So those people will go and help them, and then they will come back. Sometimes they'll tell them, you know, you're going to come to Europe with me, help to farm. They take them to the Americas, they bring them back. And you have that happen a few times. So now the kings are just like, well, we just send people to go help. Then they come back. So now, as they have the trades going, they're bringing resources from America. Now they have resources going to Europe from Kemet. They're bringing resources back from America to Kemet. The resources that go to Europe and that come from America and go to Europe, now they are now processed and produced in different forms of production. So now, if they found out the recipes for alcohol, which they did in those trades from Kemet, the alcohol now they go and make in Europe is totally different. Has anybody tasted like palm wine and millet beer from Kemet? It's totally different than gin and, spirits from Europe. So different forms of production now give them things that actually have some, they're actually extraordinary to the people there, meaning they're out of the ordinary. They're not what they know. So now they have different ways of producing cloth, the cotton that they're getting from the trades, different ways of producing the alcohol that they're getting and all of that. And now that they can bring and have some power in the trading. So at a certain point, they then go back to that original idea. Okay, but if you don't want to kill the people, that are to your west, why don't you go and capture them and then bring them to us, and then they can go help us, and then, just like you guys are helping us. So now for us, there's no problem in that, because you have wars where you capture people anyways, but you don't take their life, but you might capture them, and then, after some time, or maybe they're there kind of as a servant, but in a total different way where it's like you owned and chains and all of that. So that now works. So now people on the coast start to capture people in surrounding territories and then bring them to be given to these Europeans, and then these Europeans are telling them, we're going to go take them to a place where they can help us away from your territory, so now you can have a little bit more land and grow your kingdom, et cetera, et cetera. So this was the situation. Then another very important point in this progression happens. Another point that has been terribly misconstrued in world history today. How many of you know of gunpowder? Gunpowder really has its origins in Kemet. Because in spiritual ceremony, even those of you who come with us to pilgrimage, you'll see we use gunpowder in many ceremonies. You use gunpowder in many ceremonies. Even children in, as young as 10, 12 years old, they can make a gun in the bush to fire off in the ceremonies in their spiritual ceremony. So that knowledge is there in Kemet. Europe learned about the recipe to make gunpowder from those trades. But remember, I said when it goes back to Europe with a different mind, a different cultural perspective, and now new methods of production, now gunpowder becomes something totally different. Because gunpowder used in our spiritual ceremonies, one would never use it on another person. Because remember, the 77 commandments is at the basis of your culture. Approaching the gods and adopting divine, or building yourself to divine qualities, is what the Kemetic culture is based on. How can I then go take in human life with gunpowder? Gunpowder is to honor the gods. How backwards is that? But now you have guns that will come back and now enter those trades at a certain point. And the influence taking place between the cultures now opens up a lot of things at that time. So if you'll notice, remember I said these interactions started around 1000 AD. Europe reached the Western Hemisphere, the Americas, around 1400 AD. You also see around 1400 AD what we call, or what's called in history, gunpowder civilizations now sprout up in Asia and Europe, and even on the coast of Africa, where they're trading this new weapon made with gunpowder. Because even the guns we have in ceremonies aren't like the guns for weapons. All of this happens right at the same time, but history doesn't really give an answer to why. What's the reason that this all happening right at that time? Even the knowledge of iron working, they're learning a lot from their interaction with the Kemetic tribes in the western portion of Meritah. So this is very, very big. This aspect of human history is very big. There was one other aspect I want to mention that I left out. When Europeans reached the Americas, even before they really called on more first assistance and then human resources from the continent of Kemet, black people there already. What they called black people there already. Descendants of Kemet already there. Because remember, they got the maps from Kemet, so we've been going there. They found the descendants of Kemet, they found what they're now calling the Native American tribes, they found all of that, and because remember, it's just a part of their cultural perspective. They subdued them first. They tried subduing them first. And once they could do that as much as they could, then they went, and now we're trying to get people from across the sea. Because if I have people right in front of me, I'm not going to go across the sea to get them. So even what we don't understand is a lot of even the families in the South now who have a lot of land, they had that land even before white people came, even before Europeans came. But then under the system of enslavement, they also became victims to that at some level. But all of the land that they have, that goes back for them a very long time. Because there were many, many, it's not just like one Kemetic culture that came here. Those travels from Kemet, the Kemetic coast, to the Americas were happening over and over and over again over a long, long period of time. So now you see the huge influence that this portion of human history is having on the way we live today, just as about in the introduction. I'm standing here, you look in the front, glass came from Kemet. Gunpowder came from Kemet. Soap came from Kemet. The maps of the world came from Kemet. Incense, perfume, all of these things were byproducts of that trade that was even happening before the trade of human beings began. So this is right before now what we call the Industrial Revolution. And it's only because of what Europe gained from these trades that allowed for the Industrial Revolution. I'm going to say that again. It's only from what Europe gained from these exchanges that allowed for the Industrial Revolution. Can you have an Industrial Revolution without iron working? Can you have an Industrial Revolution without weapons? Can you have an Industrial Revolution without soap and glass? So when we're talking about the biggest influence on today's world, we're talking about the trade of human beings from the motherland. Now, think about how big of a detriment it is to you and your children if you only look at that aspect of human history and how it's shaped today in 1 month, in the shortest month of your year. Because that's when you learn about it, right? You learn about it in February. Remember I said at the beginning, if by the end of this lecture you don't see the need for you to take the responsibility of over what you know in your own hands away from this one that you've called slave master, then maybe you should have stayed at home. Because now our situation is too grave. It's too serious. This is just the influence that the transatlantic trade has had on today's world. Remember, I said the 1400s, Europeans got to the West. You see gunpowder civilizations starting up. Now, the start of the slave trade or the start of the transatlantic trade is given what date? You'll see some people will say 1500s. You'll see some people will say 1600. But you remember, I'm telling you, this exchange started in 1000 AD. And it didn't start with human cargo. And then when it got to human cargo, it was hundreds of years later. And then when they are saying it started, 1600s. Now, then it goes on for almost 300 more years. Now, that entire time, you're benefiting from the Kemet. Now you're benefiting from free labor. And now you reach what we call the end of slavery, what we call the Emancipation Proclamation. By that time, the foundation of capitalism is already set. There's already stock companies. There's already great wealth in this place. There's already wealth in Europe, a place that's how big this was. Went from being a place of darkness, no hygiene, no food. How many of you know that's where, only asparagus. That means cannibalism was very prevalent. Even today, you look into some of the archaeological finds they're coming up with now in Europe, and they're telling you how human meat was day-to-day consumption there. That's just when I'm saying that place is just difficult for human life, that's what I mean. Now, if you add to that a culture of aggressiveness, a culture of domination, human being has no chance on a spiritual level. So now, by the time the Emancipation Proclamation comes, you already have things in place. And if you look back in Europe, you can see something happen where they already got the equation down. They already learned the process to go about it. And that process is when you are enslaving people and you are actively enslaving them, that means you're the one to wake them up, to force them to go work for you, to provide their livelihood for you, provide their livelihood to bring you the wealth that they gain. You're the one to punish them when they're doing wrong and all of that. Now, at a certain point, even in European slavery, they see that, you know what, this is just not a very smart way to do things. We will have to transform this system into a way where they will want to give their livelihood to us without us having to stand behind them with a whip or a gun or a weapon. And you see that happen, and you see slavery transform to what we call serfdom, transform to what we call entrapment. You can study all of this in European history. And now the same process comes here to the West. So now you have people that have spent centuries working for you, working up the wealth. Again, remember, at the beginning I said human perspective is very small. We live maybe in this place, maybe 70, 80 years, if we're lucky, maybe 100 years. Imagine, just as you go to work now, if you working every day, you don't get weekends, you working daily, every day. All of the wealth you accumulate, all of the yields of your work goes to somebody else. And not just for that one lifetime of 60, 70 years of maybe 60 years where you can give good work. Then you watch your kids do the same thing. You watch your kids do the same thing. You watch their kids do the same thing. Because this was for generations, free labor. Think about even how much money you've made your boss and just the 30, 40 short-lived you've been alive, 40 short years you've been alive. Now think if that happened for centuries. And that's even with what you taken home. Now think if you didn't take anything home. Now, of course, at that time, the system is already set. Of course, at that time, they have wealth where now they can start to give you something. Of course, at that time, they have wealth where now they can start to make cars and machines that you will want to purchase. But whose sweat did it come from? So they see, just as they saw in Europe before, because remember, we're not talking about a race. We're talking about the spirit of evil that continues to dominate human beings around the planet. And that spirit of evil can infect any human being, no matter the color. Now, just as they saw in Europe, they saw, okay, it's going to be wiser if we give these people their freedom with a signature, and then now we can have a system where they will continue to bring us their life energy and to accumulate our wealth. And so that's what was done. I mean, think about it. Think of yourself maybe in the 1600s. You wake up on the cotton plantation that you were born on. You wake up to the sound of the bugle by the slave overseer. They get you out of the barn. You have to go into the fields to start harvesting cotton. You have to work all day under the sun. Maybe you might stop to eat, then you go right back. Maybe at some point you're going to have to see somebody be punished for doing something that they shouldn't have did. Maybe they have to put a bit in their mouth. Maybe they're getting whipped. Maybe they're getting tortured. And then you go back to work, and now you have to work until it's time to go to sleep, and then you go to sleep, and then you wake up in the morning and do the same thing again. Now, think about today. You wake up to the sound of the alarm. You set yourself. You go, you get in the car that industrial revolution has led to from the sweat and the blood of your ancestors. And then you drive to work all day for the same system, the same spirit of evil that's dominating the planet and has been for century after century after century. You stop to eat. You stop for a smoke break. You come back. Maybe at some point you have to watch as somebody is being punished for not doing what the system wants them to do. Maybe they're thrown into the penitentiary where they said slavery is still legal. And then you get off, you punch out, you take that car back home, you go to sleep, and you wake up and do the same thing again. What changed? Your life force is still going to the same, and your identity that was taken from you long ago is still back there where you left it. Let's make one thing clear. Freedom is not given with a signature. Slavery cannot be ended with a signature. If you think that it can, that shows the success of the propaganda system that you now live in. Because if somebody subdues you, puts you on the ground, steps on your back, steps on your neck, and then says, you know what, I'll take my foot off, and you don't get up, you're still that same carpet they can walk on. And if you look into our history, you see it time and time again. Even now, you don't even have to look into your history. Look into your phone. Hey, the phone companies need coltan. Who do they go and take it from? Whose lives do they go and throw at it? But now, because the system has been built, the wealth of the system has been built by your ancestors, now they have the wealth to make you who are not aware even want to come and give it, even want to go die just to risk your life to go and mine it so that you can get it and get some of the trinkets from the system built off the lives of your ancestors. Freedom is not signed away. Respect is not signed away, it's conquered. You will have to stand up if you don't want to be stepped on. And how do we stand up? The basic thing is, if I left my identity back there and I was one way before this system of enslavement found me, very basic is I just go back to find out how to be that way again. If I have a language, I have a name, I have a way of being, I have that, the questions that I pose to existence, the answers that existence gives to me, I have a way to approach the gods before the system of enslavement finds me. And then now it found me. I've been enslaved for generation after generation. I've been somebody's floor. Now they take their foot off my back. And what I go do is go and find the same gods they gave me to worship when I was a slave. I'm not standing up. Those are gods of slavery. Because before slavery, I didn't know them. If I'm going to stand up, I'm going to have to look back to what I looked like I was doing when I was standing. Simple, right? That's simple. So this is the situation today. We live in a place, no matter how we like to distract ourselves from it, we live in a place built by enslavement of human beings. The big financial companies, the big insurance companies, even the big universities, from the wealth of enslavement. You know that? Lehman Brothers, Aetna, all of your Ivy League schools, all of them started from the wealth slavery built. Even some of those schools went out and made sure to, what do you call that? Recruit from the prominent slave families so that they make sure to be keeping that wealth. Even Wall Street started by selling slaves. New York is a financial capital of the world today because of enslavement. This is the system that you're in. You can turn your face away from it. You can live by the ostrich philosophy and bury your head in the sand and pretend it's not there, but it's still going to be there. You pop your head up, it's still right there. So now your ancestors watch you from the Emancipation, from the land in the West, and they're just wondering, when is my son, my daughter going to stand up? And you think maybe standing up is just gaining more of the money that this system is producing. No, that money's just blood. That money's the blood of those ancestors that lost it so that this system could benefit. That's not what's going to make them happy. That you go get your cut. What will make them happy is the identity they wish they could have again. The identity they were told, I will cut your tongue out if you speak that language. The identity they were just hoping to get back to, the place they were hoping to get back to. Now you're not in chains. Now there's nothing binding you or keeping you from it, and you just don't want to go. This is our reality today. This is a very, very serious topic, not only because it has shaped today's world, not only because it's at the all of the wealth that you see around you in Europe, in America, but also because it's still happening. Also because slavery didn't end. Because now freedom is like a belief. And that's as high as it needs to be. for the people in today's modern society. Hey, I have freedom. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You don't need to actually see what looks like freedom. As long as you think you have it, you got it. That's a pitiful existence. We know we're going to have to face reality if we're going to live with any kind of honor, any kind of dignity. We can't go on lying to ourselves and thinking that we can progress like that. We look into society, we look in the streets, the ones that lie to themselves, we call them crazy. They don't get dignity. Now, if we want something more for ourselves, we're going to have to look at the reality of the situation that we're in and then act accordingly. It seems simple. I'm become a victim of enslavement. The very first thing I have to do is just get back to how I looked before enslavement happened. Okay. How long have I been talking? Okay. Before we take questions, and we're going to open up the questions to those who are here present in the Chicago Center, as well as those who are present in some of our other locations. I want to end with one thing, and that's a message that a royal court in the city of Bobo Dioulasso, which is a city in the western region of Burkina Faso, had given us on the Earth Center's annual pilgrimage and told us to take back with us to the diaspora and the people in the world. And understand, when I say diaspora, until this idea of white versus black and this concept of race came about, anybody with one drop of color in your blood knew your homeland is Kemet, knew the motherland is Kemet. Now, what does it benefit us if we demonize who amongst us in humanity does that benefit? What does it benefit us if we now kind of hide the history that everybody's coming from that place and everybody has something to gain from that place? None of us in the modern world in this situation of pity have anything to donate to them. Because the same knowledge that's been running this world, running humanity for the last 100,000 years, they're still holding it. So about 3 years ago, on the Earth Center's annual pilgrimage, we were received by the royal court in Bobo, and one of the members of the royal court welcomed us. He said he expressed was to see us, how happy he was to see a group of people coming back to Meritah to learn the traditions, to learn the culture, to create themselves within it. And he said, I want to let you know this is your place. He said, this is your place, and you and I have the same blood, and you can see, because we sitting here, you can feel the energies between us. Our ancestors didn't have any problems, or else we'd feel it right now. And the same way, the same kind of unification that our ancestors have, that's still what I'm receiving you with, and I want you to know this is your place. He said, I want you to carry this message to the diaspora and let all of them know who are also seeking to reconnect to their ancestral culture, who are also seeking a way out of the desperate situation that the modern world and its leaders are pushing us. Let them know that we haven't lost anything. That here we haven't lost anything. And that when you see us, know that the way that we live, because they live in nature, they don't live in skyscrapers, they live still knowing the plants, they live even if they live in mud houses. He said, let them know that's a choice that we make. It's not because we are missing something. It's the choice that we make to stay close to the earth, to stay close to the spiritual world. Make sure they know that, and that if they want it, we still have it here. So please understand that this movement that was started by the prophet, and for those of you who are familiar with the Earth Center, familiar with the Earth Center lecture series, you'll notice now that we're referring to the Makaru or Master Naba as a prophet. Because even when we go back and we go around the Kemetic temples and the Kemetic royalty, all of them see the success that he had, and he said, you make sure all of them know that he was our prophet. If the modern religions are claiming they had prophets, or claiming they had somebody who woke up the people to whatever ambition they had, make sure they know that he went out and worked for us. Anybody who knows the Makaru knows he didn't get wealthy. He wasn't interested in that. He came here, he fought, he struggled, he worked to teach people, even people in this kind of society where everybody thinks they know everything. He's having to deal with all of that. And then he lived only 48 years, and through that now we have 8 schools, and now people back home see people coming with some humility, wanting to get back to their culture. And that's just speaking about what he's done on a very practical level. He's seen as the prophet in the traditions, the prophet of the Kemetic traditions, or the most recent prophet of the Kemetic traditions. So this is the Renaissance that he started, and if you are interested, please look further into the Earth Center schools. We have 8 around the planet: Chicago, New York, San Diego, Los Angeles, Charleston, West Virginia, Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, London, England, and Birmingham, England. I will stop there and ask if anybody has any questions to please bring them. I will do my best. Yes, sister. Yes, I didn't say that it was the origins of Europeans, but I did say that there was a tribe north of the Mediterranean Sea. Well, what you first is a very difficult question, sister, and I know it seems like an easy question. It seems like an honest question, but the reason it's a difficult question is because it's a product of our education. Meaning, even if one is to say how did they get to where they were, then we have to be sure we're talking about the same thing. Because I just said white people started as this one ethnic group. So now, if white people started as this one ethnic group, are you asking how they got to where they were? Because Europe is a big place. Yeah, let me just finish. because Europe is a big place. And until that dualism was created, even much of Europe was even known as Kemet before that. So it becomes harder and harder when you really look at the reality of humanity to draw that line where is a us and a they. Because remember, I said anyone with any drop of color, anyone with any drop of color in their blood knows they're from Kemet. That means if the hair is not white like cotton, if the pupil is not white like the white of the eye where you can't tell the difference between the pupil and the white, then you can't say that you're white. And even those people, I don't even think you see those people anymore in humanity. So to get to the question though, that really is in the West, we reserve that for the initiations because the West is too politically charged, emotionally charged on this myth of race. So then if we just go answering with the realities, people then just put them in their emotions and then we don't get anywhere. What the Earth Center is doing and what we are doing is thinking about how we can bring about unification instead of continuing to separate ourselves. And now even the question loses its kind of importance when we see, well, I can't really identify anybody that doesn't have one drop because even the whitest of us seem to have some blue in the eye or some green in the eye or something where I can tell the difference between the pupil and the white. So now we all in this situation, let's just see how to make it work. Okay, any other questions? I think I saw somebody raise their hand over here before. I'm gonna go to the internet if you guys don't have questions. So I want to make sure I didn't miss anybody. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
But then what about this like explorer? Did they make up that story of Africanus and him running after Africa? That's like completely fiction. Like they didn't want to talk about that the word actually came from Kemet.
Yes. Yes. Remember, I said, whoever is telling the story, whoever's telling the history, they're always kind of going to glorify themselves. So if we remember, I said that world maps came from Meritah. So to have a person outside of Meritah create the first map of Meritah is just kind of something to feed to the propaganda education system that we have that's just trying to demonize and devalue Kemet as if nothing is coming out of Kemet, and then put that value, give that value to the European territories. But just as I said, that's why I also pointed out with Greece, they did the same thing. Now they'll put it on a god. But even the name Greece was being used before they started, the Greek philosophers started to come up with their gods. So it can't be from that god because you used it first. And it's the same thing with Rome, it's the same thing with Africa. Yes? Can you rephrase the question? Maybe. Mm-hmm. No, remember I said it's in the 77 commandments to help people that are in need of help. So if someone is in need of help and they saying, can you come and help teach me how to farm, how to uh, um, sustain my people back home. We're learning how to grow crops. No spiritual person, if they have the resources, is going to say no to that. Yeah, that's very, very important because, again, so much now. Remember, I said at a certain point, enslavement transforms. And when enslavement transforms, what becomes very important because you no longer have a whip or a gun to keep people in line is the education. And that's why I'm calling the system of propaganda. Because the education now no longer becomes about educating. It becomes about giving the propaganda that will keep everybody in line. So now, one of the greatest kind of positions of pity that a person can be put in is if somebody came and did something to you and your brother, and now can get you to fight your brother and look at him as the person that caused the problem instead of him, and then he can go walk away and be scot-free. There's nothing more kind of pitiful than that. That shows you've been dominated, because now you're even fighting against your brother. But at no point did anybody from Kemet leave the shores of Kemet and go to Europe and say, hey, we have people for sale, come and get them. Because remember, the people from Europe were coming. Remember how I said they were coming? No wealth behind them. No even hygiene. Even the kings, after they got the perfume and incense from those trades, that's what they use. Okay, let me just kind of cover up the smell because water is still evil. You die with water in my place. So now I'm just putting some smell good on top of all of it. That was the culture there. You don't see this when you see the paintings of European kings and all of that. This is just the harsh reality of how humanity looked in that place. That's how it was. So now you can't have people that come like that to your shores, and then the first thing you think to do, hey, I got something you might want to buy. Look at my brother here. Look how strong he is. Come on. We didn't send out we didn't send out salesmen. We didn't advertise them when they got to the shores. This was a situation of manipulation. Now, if you have a situation of manipulation and the manipulator can get you through manipulation to be fighting the other one suffering in the situation, you know you've manipulated. You've been manipulated. Okay, let me take a question from. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. For those online, let me repeat the questions. The first question was, what is the origin of those people in Europe? And that was the one where I explained it's hard to answer that question in the modern world because of how emotional we've been built up on this distraction of race. And it's also hard to answer that question because you have to define what you mean by they, because even that is just in confusion now. Because those white people started with a very small group, and then as they began to build power, other people in the area were like, okay, let me be considered white so I could just stay from out of the way of their cannon. I don't want to get killed, so why don't you just see me as white? So if you have lighter skin, a thinner nose, I'm white too, please, I'm white too. Wave the white flag. So that's the situation there. So that was the first question. The second question was about, what was the question you asked us? Oh, African, yeah. The history of the word Africa and now it being given to the explorer. And the third question was about how enslavement started. And that was what I was just explaining. Okay, are there any questions from any other centers? There's a question about where does evil originate according to the Chem culture. That's a very good question. is a very important question for us as human beings because we can see that's what we being dominated by, and that's what can infect any human being, regardless of identity, regardless of race, territory, gender. Let me not say race, pigmentation, gender, however you want to look at it. But this question is pretty deep. But to sum it up, there is the Kemetic spiritual texts that there are many Kemetic spiritual texts that are dedicated to this subject, because in spirituality you have to know what you are fighting to resist in order to be able to fight it. If your education system kind of speaks about it as a taboo or doesn't talk about it, then it puts everybody in a vulnerable place to be conquered by it or taken advantage of it by it. But evil comes, the way we understand evil is coming from a holy text called the Holy Drama, and the origin of it can be identified in a story of the god Whistler and the god Seth. But it's another lecture in itself to go into detail about that. But we do have a lecture by the founder of the Earth Center about that subject, which is the Holy Drama, and that's available on CD. Any other questions? What advice or guidance can you give young world leaders? What I can say about leadership in today's world is that we need to invest into our own spiritual education, because one doesn't just go about being a leader. You have to follow to be a leader. You have to do good at following to become a leader. And now the problem that we're having is that leadership now is becoming about ambition. So when a person is very ambitious, then of course they just want to be in positions of leadership. But that has put us in a place where our leaders don't really, in their conversation, they're not really giving us any sentiment that they have any kind of spiritual evolution. And so their speeches and where they're leading us just reflects their ambition rather than the spiritual realities that the human being face. And we must invest ourselves into our own understanding of the human being and our spiritual purpose on earth before we can even think about leading others. We have to know how to lead ourselves. Any other questions? When did the Kemetic kings realize that people were not going to return? You have to remind me to repeat the question, because I don't see you all on the internet. You know, the new ideas of the new world. The first question was, what was the origins of evil? The second question was, what advice can I give, or what would I say to the new young leaders of the world? I would say if you haven't been a young follower of the world, you're not a young leader. And then this question is repeated for me. When did the Kemetic kings realize that people were not going to return? Well, remember, as I stated, this situation occurred over hundreds of years. So you have a progression that's happening. So even those first kings that it was happening to, where they were seeing people come and people go and people come back, and they were seeing, people go, this is a total different king than the next one that comes, and so on and so on and so on, because this is spanning over hundreds of years. But remember, I said that as time went and as you begin to have production in Europe, and the products that are coming back, the new forms of alcohol that now do something totally different to the brain, the new products, gunpowder products, now you start to have an influence over the coastal people of Meritah. Because what you also want to understand is that this situation, the manipulation happened between the putting the coastal people against the inland people. So the coastal people were not really the people that were being enslaved. The coastal people were being utilized to go and get the people inland and then bringing them to the coast to put them into the trade. And so that situation was going on, and those coastal people were becoming more and more influenced by religion, by education, by the new products that was coming. And so over this progression, at a point they didn't care if they were coming back or not. Remember I said no person, no matter what color, what height, what size, what gender you are, is immune to evil. Just like now we all do whatever we do for whatever we want from it. We lost our taboos and our principles that our ancestors used to live by, and now it's more about, well, is the price of what I'm going to get worth what I'm going to do? And everybody is vulnerable to that evil if we're not living by the principles of our ancestors. Are there any other questions?
How do we reconnect with our ancestors when so many of us are so disconnected from our knowledge of our bloodlines?
How do we reconnect with our ancestors when so many of us are so disconnected from our bloodlines and the knowledge of our bloodlines? Good question. But the path of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. So it will be for everyone to begin to look into whatever opportunity has crossed your path to get closer to your ancestral culture. And just as I said, if you have one drop of color in your blood, then you know your ancestors are coming from Kemet. Even the science that is a branch of the same monster trying to dominate the world has came and told us that, hey, everybody's coming from this continent. Even they had to admit it. So it is a good question, because sometimes you can have many people kind of take the opportunity to provide to those of us in the colonial world, those of us in the marketplace. If we have a desire, they will provide something to sell us. But you will have to be wise and proactive and look into organizations that are presenting your ancestral culture. For myself, I was in this same position. That's why I was very happy to find the Earth Center and what the Prophet was doing, because when you look at it, you look at his history, you look at what he's doing, you can see where his what's behind him. You can see he wasn't here for anything but trying to reconnect the people to their culture, and then you can come and see what we're doing yourself when we take you back home. So I would suggest that if you're listening to this lecture, then it's clear that your path has crossed the Earth Centers, and to look into the Earth Center. Yes, sister.
In developing a relationship with your ancestors, how active can you expect them to be in your daily life?
In developing a relationship with your ancestors, how active can you expect them to be in your daily life is the question. Well, one thing that you'll want to understand and kind of change your perspective is that your ancestors exist within you. So if you're active in your daily life or inactive, that's them being active in your daily life. But if you are not honoring them, performing the daily spiritual activities and the ceremonies that were defined long ago by our ancestors and those spiritual technicians of Kemet, to open the dialogue and maintain the harmony of the dialogue between you and your ancestors, then what you have is kind of like a disharmony within yourself. And so that disharmony within yourself will be reflected in your life. And when you can achieve that harmony, it will be reflected in your life. But I can't really say your ancestors are on this side and you're on that side, so when do they influence you? Because they're in you. So it's either about regaining that harmony and standing as yourself again, or continuing to be in disharmony and standing where you can kind of be taken advantage of, just kind of like blowing like a tree leaf in the wind. Yes, sister.
Does it get really difficult when you've achieved a certain level of harmony, but then we live in this world, this system that you mentioned, and so you can't always be away from that system. You have to deal with that system, and I'm sure the ancestors, because they were in a more harmonious environment, they weren't walking out into the street dealing with all this calamity. So do we have to kind of almost turn the rituals up a notch, or like what are some steps that you could say that help keep you in harmony, knowing the type of world that we live in this existence?
Sister, did you forget I have to repeat these questions? The question is, does it get difficult, or when you've started and when you've gotten to a certain level of kind of harmonizing yourself, does it get difficult living in a place like this, and does it call on more activity, more ritual from your side? What you'll want to understand is that spirituality is about the individual. And so as an individual, it is about you and your ancestors, the dialogue between you and your ancestors. And you, especially you all here in this room, those of you who are listening from the colonial territories of the planet, those of you who are listening from the places that have been enslaved, we all know that our ancestors, our most recent ancestors, were also not allowed to reconnect with their ancestral roots. So our disharmony is going back some time. And so if our ancestral roots, or if you can think about the way our elders put it once, if you can think about everybody now trying to invest in their spirituality again, those who maybe your father and his father and his father and your mother and her mother and her mother were actively doing this, you have a very small hole to fill. And then you kind of, doing things that are benefiting you. But us in the modern world, who our ancestors were taken away, disconnected, and then nobody has been feeding their spiritual roots, their ancestors, everybody has been kind of putting their attention into the gods of slavery. The holes we have to fill first, just to help those ancestors where they are in the world of the dead, just to give them a chance to rest at peace, instead of having to wander in the existence, because they didn't get a chance to do what was necessary before they entered the world of the dead, and now their children are also turning their backs on them, not doing anything for them when they're in the world of the dead. That hole is very deep. And so you will have to do a lot just to fill the hole, to help all of those in the line that didn't get to help themselves. So I can say that. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
What would you say would be a Kemetic response to reparations? Since we're talking about slavery, one of the solutions to address the enslavement of our ancestors is by way of reparations, and I'm wondering what a Kemetic response would be to
questions start out so short, and then I know how to repeat them, and then you guys. What is the Kemetic response to reparations? I think I really already answered that in the lecture. I tried to touch on that for those of you who were paying attention and me trying to kind of subtly touch on it. But just like I said, if you keep in mind the Kemetic understanding of spirituality, and you understand that your ancestors are now in a place where they're suffering. If nobody has done the ceremonies to raise them from the positions that they're in as dead relatives to the positions of ancestors to be at peace in the inundate, the world of the dead. And now they're suffering. And now they're watching into life. They're watching their children. They're watching their son. They're watching their daughter give their same blood to the same thing that ruined, that killed, that ended their life. They're not looking for you to get a piece of the pie. They're looking for you to stand up and put some dignity back on their name. And you just saying, hey, give me my peace, give me my peace. I should be benefiting from the destruction of my ancestors too. Why would they be happy with that? It's not about money. Everybody who's continuing to think it's about money, you're trapped in the propaganda system. Money is the blood of your ancestors. You're just saying, hey, give me some blood of my ancestors too. So we don't see that as a way to honor or dignify our ancestors. We see getting ourselves back to how we were before our enslavement as what's going to make them say, hey, that's my son. Hey, that's my daughter. You see, all that time, I'm suffering under the whip. I'm suffering on those boats. I just want to get back home. I just want to look how I looked, talk how I talk, worship how I worship. And then if you can do that, they're going to be so proud. And that's what dignifies them. If you can put some more bills in your wallet from their destruction, if I'm them, I'm going to curse you even more. Are there any other questions? Yes, sir. Gods of slavery. Barakah. Can you put that question as? So are we cursed by our ancestors? Yes. Are we cursed by our ancestors is the question. Is that maybe the reasons behind the situations that we see ourselves in today? What I will say, so as not to kind of create some emotional situation between you and your ancestors, first, or the ancestors of our listeners, first what you want to understand is that spirituality is a very technical field, just as I've stated. Being a very technical field, it's only recently that now you have people coming and saying, well, I don't believe in gods. I'm an atheist. That's very new, because human history shows us there's just a spiritual world. When you interact with it and you're in a culture and a society that interacts with it, there's no denying it. There's not, I believe it or not. I can close my eyes, I don't believe it. That's ridiculous. You interact in it, so it is there. Just like I see you all now, I'm interacting with you. I could say I don't believe you're here, but then I just look crazy, right? So spirituality is very technical. And spirituality starts, as I said, with ancestors. Because no matter what god or goddess we think we give our attention to, we honor, no matter which one we revere, we have to face that god and goddess couldn't create us without using our ancestors. Nobody here just came from a god, from the workshop table of the gods, right? Did anybody here remember that? Nobody does that. Everybody is born from their mother and their father, who's born and their father, who's born from their mother and their father. So, as powerful as the gods are, and they're powerful, every one of them is powerful, more powerful than us. We don't argue that. But what we argue, or what we will say, is that as powerful as they are, they have to use your ancestors to create you, and that shows the power your ancestral spirit has over you. So, if those powerful gods, remember I said I will give them all the consideration and the power you give them, no matter which one it is, because I'm a human. I can't say they're not powerful. I know they're all more powerful than me. And if they're all more powerful than us, the humans, how can we go directly to gods and they can't even go directly to us? They're more powerful. They have to use a channel that's set by a very technical existence. So they use that channel through our ancestors. They create us. Now, us now thinking that we can be spiritual going through them, we just fooling ourselves. There's no spirituality if it doesn't start with ancestors. And if you notice, every religion that has been presented to you to dominate you has made sure to push that part out of the way, because that's where your power is. So now you have another situation with the ancestors, which I mentioned a second ago, but I'll explain, is that every relative that you had in your line that died is not necessarily an ancestor. At the beginning, in death, they're just what we can call a dead relative. We can give the concept of dead relative to them. That means that the only influence they can have on you is trying to wake you up, trying to shake you so that you'll wake up to the fact that, hey, there's some things that you need to do from me, from the world of the living, for me in the world of the dead, that's going to help me to be able to have a positive effect on your life. And until those things are done and we are able to put them in that position to have a positive influence on our life, the only influence they can have is like that, like wake up. Those are the gods of slavery. Wake up. So yes, if what was stated, if you lived your life, you lived on that cotton plantation, you went through all of those struggles, all of that suffering, all of that torture, you watched your loved ones be tortured, all of that. You wanted to worship in the ways of your ancestors. If you even remembered them, you couldn't. You're forced to go kneel before some god that looks like your slave master. And now you just make sure you have kids. I mean, in some places you were breeded. You had to have kids. You couldn't decide. But now you have kids, and you just hope on your deathbed that they'll get back to honoring your life. And now you watch from your place in the Emancipation. You can't do anything good for them from where you are because you haven't been given that power. And you're just waiting for them to wake up and honor you, to put you in your place so that now you can have some influence over your bloodline and making sure to put them in the place that's best for them. But you're watching, and instead of doing it, they're just going back to those gods of slavery. And now they're just going back and trying to benefit from your enslavement. And now they're going back, they're saying, we want reparations, give us a cut of our ancestors' enslavement. What will you do? The only thing you can do is shake. You're going to shake the hell out of them, right? I mean, that's the situation that we in. We being shook. We being shook all around the planet because what is most pitiful, most detrimental is that everybody has a choice to present themselves to the world as they wish, every culture. But you come from a culture that did that already. Now you're the son of a person that did that already. You don't have the choice of what you want to do. You are that one son, no matter what. You can't say, hey, I'm not their son. So now it's just pitiful for you to be the one that falls to these silly religions that don't even make sense. You see, every time it doesn't make sense, and you even a child, and you say, well, what about this? Flooded the earth. What about all the people? What about all the creatures in the sea? They get off? All of these questions, and then you see, whenever you have those questions, you just said, hey, just believe, just have faith. This is not a religion. This is not a mental practice for the people who are the descendants of those who open the world's eyes to spirituality. So for them, they have to be shaken. So we're going to have to wake up and put ourselves back in the position that our ancestors left us, or we're going to be shaken. Okay. What time is it? Can we take some more questions? And we said 4 to 7? Okay. I'll take one more. You're an initiate, so I'm not going to take you. Is there any other one? Is there another one from the internet? What is the name? What is the definition of the name Kemet in the Medu language? And I've heard it defined as the land of blacks. How valid is this without the notion of race? That was it? Good question. Kemet, yes, will mean the black lands. The black lands can be associated with the people, but the black lands, its association with the people didn't come with the dualism. So because humanity was seen as black, as people of color, and then you have many colors within that group, then you have black people. Remember I said any drop of color, you belong to the land of the blacks. But for a deeper level, blacks, in the spiritual Kemetic text, was associated with maturity. The color black is associated with maturity, like the color white is associated with purity. So now you can see our ancestral lands are going to be the lands of maturity, where we find the oldest culture. So that is also a meaning there. There are others, but if you'd like to hear those, maybe you can get into the initiation. Okay, so we're going to stop there. I'm going to thank everybody for coming. I'm going to thank everybody for coming. This is what we are doing at the Earth Center, trying to take charge again over our own future instead of continuing to give it to those calling themselves our masters. We don't give credit to people because of their barbaric tendencies and then call them masters. That's not how we put ourselves in a good position. So thank you for coming to the Earth Center today. As our elders say in the traditions, if you go to a meeting and the meeting doesn't change you, you should have stayed at home. So I want to end as I began by honoring the Prophet Nebnabala Musa Dinabig and invite you to put your energies behind this renaissance that he started and building again your ancestral, building again yourself in your ancestral culture and identity. Thank you.
Okay, before we end, I just wanted to make a couple of important announcements. So we do have the doors of initiation still open here in Chicago and also at our school in San Diego. So the last day for anyone who's interested in joining initiation here in Chicago is tomorrow, Sunday, tomorrow. So please, if you are at all interested, at least come and sit in on the class. And that way you'll have the opportunity to see what the initiates get exposed to. Same thing for our school in San Diego. The doors of initiation close in San Diego next Sunday. So please, if you are in the San Diego area, please make sure to contact the San Diego school and find out the times and the dates for the classes there, if you are at all interested. Another announcement is that we are going to open the doors of initiation again in the schools that we have located in England. So on July 11th, the doors of initiation open at our Birmingham location. And on July 12th, the doors of initiation open at our London location. So please take advantage of these opportunities. The next announcement is in regards to our beloved prophet Nebnaba. On the 15th of Hezmana, which is according to the sidereal calendar, or we will say July 22nd, next month, we will be acknowledging the death of our prophet. And on this day we fast in his honor. And there's a ceremony that is held at all of the Earth Center locations after the fast, where we acknowledge and honor the prophet, the one who came from the bush of Meritah and enlightened all of us here, all of us that are a part of the diaspora. So to him we give our gratitude and we honor him on this day. So anyone, you don't have to be an initiate to come. It's very important to communicate. You don't have to be an initiate, just to honor him, honor his work, or any way you've benefited. That's a great opportunity that you have there to, acknowledge him. The next announcement that I have is in regards to these two fireflies in particular. All of our Firefly magazines have volume numbers on them, and this is volume 67 and 68 that I'm holding right in my hands now. And these volumes actually is the beginning of a series on slavery, and they're articles that are written by Hezmana, the one who presented the lecture today. And we also have a Firefly 69 that's coming out in just a couple of weeks. And we'll also have an article in that series written by Hezmana. In addition to that, we, for the first time, a lot of people have been asking for this, but for the first time, we will now have the Firefly available as an online version. So for people who are challenged with ordering Fireflies because of the shipping costs, maybe you're very far away, living in another country, things like that, it will be accessible to you or all of you, whoever wants it in this fashion. It will be available for the first time ever. We will be able to sell it as an online PDF. So we're very excited about that. And then this is this year's sidereal calendar, year 414. The original price is $20 for our calendars, but for now it's on sale for $9. This calendar year ends in September, so it is still very useful for those who are interested, especially those who were asking questions about ways to honor their ancestors, because we do have holy days that are ancestral holy days, and we also have information about how to do purification, a purification process called ablutions, and a ceremony called Zimzim, in order to honor and validate ancestors in the divine world. So, last but not least, actually, I have two more. Excuse me. Bear with me. Okay. So we are actually doing a fundraiser for our calendar. Again, like I say, the calendar expires in September. So next month we will be doing a fundraiser. We need to raise close to $6,000 in order to print our next calendar. So we need assistance from all of our supporters in order to make this happen, as we do every year. And then last but not least is the annual pilgrimage to Meritah. This December, we will have our annual pilgrimage. And for anyone who is interested in coming along with the Earth Center, again, you do not have to be an initiate in order to come. Pilgrimage is open for anyone who is interested in learning more about a culture that belongs to them. So in December, we will be leaving, and anyone interested can contact any Earth Center to find out more information. So for all of the people who are visiting at any of our Earth Center locations, please make sure you give your information. Please leave us your phone numbers, your email addresses, so that we can contact you, keep in touch with you, and continue to build relationships. And that goes for anyone who is viewing wherever you are in the world. So again, we thank you. We wish everyone have safe travels back to wherever you're destined to go after this. And may your ancestors be with you. So thank you so much.